Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right. It feels very scientific.
Yeah, exactly. It
Mm.
feels like engineering. You break your arm, the doctor puts you on an X-ray machine, the image pops up, and they just point to that jagged white line on the screen.
Oh, yeah. There it is. That's your problem.
Right. That's the problem. It's a very comforting system, I mean, in a weird way.
Well, because the problem is localized, it's visible, and, it's contained within your own body. You know exactly what needs fixing right then and there.
But then you step out of the hospital and into the world of modern business operations.
A completely different beast.
Totally. You look at the diagnostic landscape of, say, a global enterprise today, and suddenly you realize that X-ray machine is completely broken.
Oh, it's not just broken, it's pointing at the wrong building.
Yes, because the most significant cybersecurity risk facing your organization today, it is no longer your own technology stack. I mean, it's not your servers, your employees, or, your firewalls.
The call is coming from outside the house.
The call is coming from outside the house. That's exactly it.
Yeah, the vast majority of the risk sits in this sprawling, opaque web of vendors. It's platforms and third-party dependencies that just operate completely beyond your direct control.
So your X-ray machine is broken, and the threat is literally outside your walls. Today, we're figuring out how to survive when the vendors you implicitly trust suddenly hold your operations hostage.
Which is happening more and more.
It really is. We are going to explore the critical shift from assuming trust to actively proving resilience. Because if you are a CIO, a risk officer, or just a business leader trying to figure out why a random software update halfway across the world just took down your entire logistics network.
Which is a very real scenario in 2026.
This is the reality you are navigating right now. Our mission for this deep dive is to build a concrete 90-day action plan based on the source material we have today. We're talking dependency mapping, contract security, catching hidden assets, and crucially, reporting to the board.
And, for a very long time, the industry treated third-party risk as a procurement problem, or like maybe a compliance checkbox.
Right, the old vendor onboarding checklist.
Exactly. You would vet a vendor during the onboarding process, ask them to fill out a security questionnaire, file the paperwork away in a digital cabinet somewhere, and just assume you were safe.
Out of sight, out of mind.
But the architectural reality of how we do business has fundamentally changed. I mean, the way we build and deliver services has evolved exponentially faster than the ownership model of who actually secures those services.
Let's unpack that architectural shift a bit, because I think people use terms like cloud computing and SaaS so casually now that we kind of forget the structural vulnerability we've built into the system.
We take it for granted.
We do. The sources we are analyzing today point out that this is no longer just a security issue. It is a core operating model problem. We have extreme cloud concentration, SaaS consolidation, shared identity layers.
It's all stacked on top of each other.
Right. So what does that actually mean for a business on, say, a random Tuesday morning?
Well, think about the interconnectedness. Like 10 years ago, if a vendor had an outage, maybe your marketing department couldn't send out an email blast for a few hours.
Annoying, but not fatal.
Exactly. Today, because of that deep consolidation you mentioned, a single vendor incident doesn't hit just one silo. If your primary identity provider goes offline, or, if a core cloud availability zone drops.
It takes everything with it.
Everything. It hits payroll, customer support, finance, warehouse logistics, internal communications, all at the exact same time.
The blast radius is just immediate.
Immediate and total.
And what's terrifying is that it doesn't even require a malicious cyber attack to trigger that blast radius. We've lived through massive historic supply chain disruptions recently that had absolutely nothing to do with hackers.
Oh, yeah. Self-inflicted wounds, essentially.
Let's look at July 2024. The CrowdStrike update.
That is the absolute textbook example of structural fragility.
Walk us through what actually happened there. Because the headlines were everywhere. Airlines grounded, banks halted, hospitals turning away patients.
It was chaos.
Pure chaos.
Yeah.
But mechanically, how did a single security tool take down the world?
So CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor is an endpoint security product. And to do its job, which is, hunting for malware and suspicious activity, it needs deep system-level access to the operating system.
But it has to see everything.
Right. It operates at the kernel level, which is essentially the brainstem of the computer. In July 2024, CrowdStrike pushed out a routine content configuration update to its sensors.
Just a normal, everyday update.
Exactly. But that update contained a logic error. And because it was operating at that foundational kernel level, the operating system couldn't just ignore the error or crash the application and keep running.
Because it's the brainstem. If the brainstem fails, the body drops.
You nailed it. The error caused the entire Windows operating system to crash, resulting in the infamous blue screen of death.
And because it was an automated update pushed from the cloud to millions of machines simultaneously.
The crash happened everywhere at once. Millions of Windows devices fell into a continuous boot loop. They would try to start, hit the faulty file, crash, and restart.
Just over and over again.
Yeah. And because the machines couldn't fully boot up, they couldn't receive a new network update to fix the bad file.
Oh, wow. So you couldn't just push a fix from the cloud.
No, it required manual intervention. IT teams had to physically go to the machines, boot into safe mode, and manually delete the file.
That's insane. Imagine being a CIO of a hospital network with, 40,000 affected terminals spread across the city.
A nightmare. And the underlying lesson there wasn't that CrowdStrike was a bad company, right? The lesson was that a single non-malicious error from an external vendor completely paralyzed global infrastructure.
It's an economy of scale, but for disaster.
That's a great way to put it.
And we saw a different flavor of this in October 2025, right? With the AWS US East 1 regional disruption.
Oh, yes, the great routing failure.
Yeah. The postmortem on that pointed to a DNS resolution failure for DynamoDB endpoints. Now, hold on. For the business leaders listening who aren't deep in AWS architecture, what does a DNS resolution failure for DynamoDB actually look like?
It sounds like alphabet soup.
It really does. Is that like the digital phone book going offline?
That's actually a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So DNS, the domain name system, is the internet's routing layer. It translates human-readable names into the IP addresses that computers use to actually talk to each other.
So it literally is the phone book.
It is the phone book. DynamoDB, on the other hand, is a highly scalable database service used by countless applications to store their state, their memory, their user data.
So if the phone book fails.
The application can't find its memory.
Wow.
Yeah, the applications were running perfectly fine and the databases were completely healthy. Nothing was broken on either end.
Yeah.
But the connective tissue routing the traffic between them just dropped.
So the application suddenly couldn't resolve or find the databases they needed to function.
Precisely. And because US East 1 is such a massive, heavily utilized region, that failure just rippled across the entire internet.
Domino effect.
Big time. Thousands of dependent services, streaming platforms, e-commerce checkouts, smart home devices, they just stopped working in a matter of hours.
And then we saw it again just a month later, in November 2025, the Cloudflare outage.
Right, the hits just kept coming.
The report cites a configuration bug in their bot management software that triggered global 5xx errors. Now, for those who don't spend their days staring at server logs, a 5x error basically means the server is saying, I'm broken, I can't fulfill your request.
Yeah, the server is basically throwing its hands up. And Cloudflare sits in front of a massive percentage of the internet, right? Acting as this security shield and a content delivery network.
It's the bouncer at the door for half the web.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a bug in their traffic filtering logic caused their edge servers to start blocking legitimate traffic. They were just throwing those 5x errors across millions of websites. Users couldn't log in, APIs couldn't communicate.
And again, no attack involved.
None at all. Just a configuration push from a highly trusted vendor.
It changes the entire paradigm of how we view risk, doesn't it? I mean, it makes me think of an analogy. Let's step away from the classic medieval castle idea, where you just build thicker walls.
So walls don't matter anymore.
Right. Think about modern business like an auto manufacturer. You spend billions designing this incredible high-performance vehicle. You have top-tier engineers, rigorous safety tests on your assembly line, incredible quality control.
You're doing everything right internally.
Exactly. But you outsource the manufacturing of the brake pads to a third-party supplier. If that supplier quietly decides to change the chemical compound of the friction material without telling you, just to save a few pennies.
Then none of your internal testing matter.
Right. It doesn't matter how good your engine is. It doesn't matter how skilled your drivers are. When the car hits the highway and tries to stop, it crashes.
Because the structural dependency overrides your internal quality control. That is the exact shift we are seeing in executive boardrooms today.
It's a terrifying realization.
It really is. Historically, the primary question a board would ask about a vendor was just, is this vendor secure?
Do they have a good lock on their door?
Right. They would ask the CIO to produce a SOC2 audit report or an ISO certification. They'd look at the little seal of approval and they would feel satisfied.
But the sources are arguing that question is completely obsolete now.
It is entirely insufficient. I mean, a SOC2 report basically tells you what a vendor's policies look like on a specific day 6 months ago.
It's a photograph of the past.
Exactly. The ultimate new standard, the question every single board should be asking today is, if this critical vendor fails on a Tuesday morning, what stops working by lunch?
What stops working by lunch? Man, that is a brutal question.
It cuts right through the noise.
Because I guarantee you, the vast majority of leaders cannot answer it with any degree of specificity.
They really cannot. And that lack of operational visibility is why we are seeing such severe cascading consequences. You do not need a headline-grabbing nation-state ransomware attack to suffer massive financial and reputational damage.
You just need a bad update.
Yeah. If your communications API fails, your multi-factor authentication texts don't go out, which means your customers can't log into their bank accounts. This lands squarely in operations.
So if our operations are entirely dependent on these external forces, we need to know exactly what those forces are. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part of our deep dive. The invisible attack surface.
The stuff you can't even see on the X-ray.
Exactly. The threats lurking in the supply chain that you don't even know exist, let alone have a plan to recover from. The data from Risk Ledger on the top overlooked supply chain cyber risks for 2026 is incredibly illuminating here.
It's sobering data.
Very. The attack surface has expanded light years beyond the big-name vendors you actively sign enterprise contracts with.
We have to move past the idea that a vendor is only someone you issue a purchase order to.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, the modern supply chain includes informal adoptions, nested software components, and even physical hardware layers that completely bypass traditional procurement.
Let's run through these, starting with one that I think every company struggles with. Shadow IT. Now, usually when people hear shadow IT, they think of like an employee using a free, unvetted tool to convert PDFs because the corporate software is too slow.
Right, the classic workaround.
But the sources suggest the risk profile here has matured into something much more dangerous, hasn't it?
Significantly. I mean, a PDF converter is annoying for IT, but it's isolated. The modern version of shadow IT is a marketing department quietly adopting a generative AI tool to draft customer email campaigns.
Which sounds harmless on the surface.
Until you realize they are directly feeding that tool your proprietary CRM data to train it.
Oh, well.
Or think about an engineering team using an unauthorized cloud environment to test code because the official channels just require too many approvals.
So highly sensitive corporate data, or even your actual source code, is suddenly sitting on a random server in a jurisdiction you've never even heard of.
Exactly. Managed by a startup with maybe 3 employees and 0 security team.
And you have absolutely no legal agreements with them.
None. You have no data processing addendums, no breach notification requirements. If that startup gets breached, they have 0 obligation to tell you.
You'll literally only find out when your CRM data ends up on a dark web forum.
Yep. And remote work and the consumerization of SaaS have made this entirely frictionless. Anyone with a corporate credit card can spin up a shadow infrastructure in 5 minutes.
That's terrifying, but it's at least visible if you know where to look. You can track credit card spend. The second invisible threat the sources highlight is deeply hidden: open source dependencies.
The Trojan horse problem.
Yes, they describe this as the Trojan horse problem, where attackers deliberately embed malicious code into widely trusted foundational libraries. Now, wait a second. Open source software is fundamentally built on Linus's law, right?
Yes, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow.
Exactly. It's supposed to be secure because thousands of developers worldwide are actively looking at the code. Are you saying those thousands of people are just missing malicious code being injected right under their noses?
It's a great theoretical concept, but the reality of modern software architecture breaks that model completely.
How so?
The problem lies in the sheer volume and the deep nesting of modern dependencies. Yes, there are many eyes on the surface-level code. The popular frameworks, the top-level tools, those are heavily scrutinized.
Because everyone uses them directly.
Right. But modern applications pull in thousands of subcomponents. A library you use for data visualization might automatically pull in 10 other libraries to handle math functions.
Okay, I see where this is going.
And then those 10 pull in 20 other libraries to handle text formatting, and so on.
It's turtles all the way down.
Exactly. You end up with this massive dependency tree that goes 5, 6, or 7 levels deep. And those foundational, deeply nested subcomponents, very few eyes are actually looking at those.
They're just assumed to be safe.
Yeah, and sometimes they're maintained by literally a single volunteer working in their spare time on weekends. Attackers know this. They don't try to hack the Fortune 500 company directly anymore.
It's too hard.
Exactly. They find an obscure foundational library that sits at the very bottom of the tree, and they compromise the maintainer's account.
Or they just volunteer to help maintain it, right?
Yeah.
They gain the developer's trust over months and quietly slip in a backdoor disguised as a routine bug fix.
Which is exactly what we saw with the XC-Utils backdoor attempt in early 2024.
That was wild.
It was a masterclass in social engineering. A threat actor spent years building trust within the open source community just to introduce a highly sophisticated hidden vulnerability into a ubiquitous compression tool.
Years. Just waiting.
Yes. And if that attacker compromises a small, obscure library, that malicious code gets automatically pulled into the software of Fortune 500 companies the very next time their developers run an update.
The malicious code is practically invited in through the front door.
Which is exactly why a software bill of materials and SBOM and automated discovery tools are constantly being pushed as non-negotiable now.
Because if you don't know the ingredients in your software, you don't know you've eaten the poison.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so that's the code level. But that ties directly into the third invisible threat, CI/CD pipeline attacks.
Continuous integration and continuous deployment. This is the central nervous system of modern software development.
For the uninitiated, CI/CD is basically the automated assembly line where developers write code, test it, and push it out to customers as updates, right?
Correct. It takes human-written code, compiles it, signs it with a digital certificate to prove it's legitimate, and packages it for delivery.
So attacking the CI/CD pipeline is basically infiltrating the supplier's development environment. The SolarWinds breach was the massive wake-up call for this.
It changed everything.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, because it wasn't just a simple hack. They didn't just guess a password and steal some files.
The SolarWinds attack, often referred to as Sunburst, was a masterclass in supply chain weaponization. The attackers didn't alter the source code repository where developers could actually see it.
Oh, so the code the developers were looking at was clean.
Completely clean. Instead, they injected their malicious code into the build server, the actual machinery of the CI/CD pipeline itself, during the brief window when the software was being compiled.
Wow. So the developers were writing clean code, but the assembly line itself was stamping a backdoor into the product right before it went out the door.
Exactly. And because the build server was compromised, the resulting malicious update was signed with SolarWinds' legitimate, valid cryptographic certificate.
It had the official seal of approval.
Yep. So when that update was pushed to thousands of clients, including major tech companies and U.S. government agencies, those client systems checked the signature, saw it was officially from SolarWinds, and just installed it without question.
It's the ultimate Trojan horse. And again, it's about economies of scale for hackers. Why try to breach 1,000 individual, highly secured companies when you can just breach one software provider's assembly line?
And ride their trusted update mechanism right through the front door of all 1,000 targets.
It's terrifyingly efficient.
And AI is dramatically amplifying this threat model today. Threat actors are deploying AI for automated credential harvesting at scale.
How does that work?
They are using machine learning models to constantly scan public code repositories like GitHub for exposed secrets or API keys that were just left behind by careless developers.
So the AI is just doing the grunt work 24/7.
Exactly. And they are generating highly believable deepfake impersonations, both audio and video, to trick a vendor's IT help desk into resetting a password or handing over access.
Deep-faking a vendor's executive to bypass security protocols. That is chilling.
It's happening.
But we also have to touch on the physical world. It's not all code and cloud servers. The sources highlight physical infrastructure and hardware backdoors as a massive growing blind spot.
This is where cyber risk and physical risk just collide. It's the realization that the actual hardware you buy is a supply chain of its own. It's full of microchips, firmware, and components sourced from all over the globe.
We've seen government investigations uncovering literal data exfiltrating backdoors in Chinese-manufactured solar panels and infrastructure components.
Right.
And as an extreme example of how far this can go, look at the September 2024 Hezbollah pager attack.
That was an absolute watershed moment for physical supply chain security.
It was crazy.
Thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies used by the group were intercepted at some point in the manufacturing or distribution supply chain. Explosive materials were physically embedded inside the devices alongside mechanisms to trigger them remotely.
I mean, it sounds like a spy movie, but it proves a fundamental operational reality. The physical components you purchase, routers, enterprise servers, biometric scanners, IoT devices, they can be physically or digitally tampered with long before they ever reach your loading dock.
Absolutely. If your core enterprise switches have compromised firmware installed at the factory, your network traffic is compromised from day one. It doesn't matter how good your firewalls are.
Okay, let's take a breath. It's overwhelming. We have shadow IT leaking data, deeply nested open-source code poisoning applications, CI/CD pipelines injecting backdoors into trusted updates, and physically tampered hardware.
It's a lot to take in.
You would think, looking at this landscape, that executives would be in a constant state of high alert, just demanding structural changes across the board.
You would think so, but the data tells a very different, deeply concerning story. There is a massive structural disconnect between the reality of the threat landscape and the confidence of the people actually in charge of navigating it.
Yes, the TPRM paradox, third-party risk management. The 2026 data from Security Scorecard that we are looking at is absolutely mind-blowing. I want to slow down and really unpack these numbers because they paint a terrifying picture of corporate delusion.
Delusion is the right word.
First stat. 86% of leaders say they are concerned about supply chain risks. Okay, that makes sense given everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
But in the exact same survey, 90% of those leaders are confident they could seamlessly continue operations if a critical vendor had an incident.
It is a stunning psychological contradiction. I mean, you cannot be highly concerned about the devastating nature of the threat, yet entirely confident in your invulnerability.
Right. It doesn't compute.
It suggests a very surface-level understanding of the risk. They know supply chain risk is a buzzword they should worry about, but they just assume their current processes are a magic shield.
And that leads to the next piece of data. 93% of these leaders think their current supply chain security measures are effective. 93%.
Incredible.
But when you press them, when you ask about their actual visibility into their vendor ecosystem, 78% admit that their internal risk management programs cover less than half of their supply chain.
That's absurd.
Let that sink in. They are literally flying blind for more than 50% of the vendors that keep their business running, but they feel 93% effective.
To understand how we arrived at this paradox, we really have to look at the methods they are relying on. Because the confidence is a facade built on fundamentally outdated tools.
What are they using?
Well, the Security Scorecard report notes that 67% of organizations are still using static annual security audits as their primary risk assessment method.
Annual spreadsheets. In a world where AI-driven threats morph by the hour, where cloud infrastructure spins up and down in seconds.
We are sending a 200-question Excel spreadsheet once a year and calling it a robust security posture.
It's almost comical.
An annual questionnaire tells you absolutely nothing about a vendor's operational reality on day 364. It is a point-in-time snapshot that is literally obsolete the moment the vendor hits send.
And it gets worse when an actual crisis occurs. According to the data, 55% of organizations rely on phone calls, emails, or scheduling ad hoc meetings to collaborate with vendors to fix a breach.
I mean, think about the timeline of that.
Let's walk through a scenario to show how absurd that is. It's 2 p.m. on a Thursday. A 0-day vulnerability in a core software component you use drops on Twitter.
Panic ensues.
Right. Hackers are actively exploiting it in the wild. And your incident response plan is to send an email to your vendor's generics support inbox asking if they're vulnerable and waiting for an account manager to schedule a Zoom call for next Tuesday.
It's completely inadequate.
It's like trying to put out a 5-alarm house fire by drafting a formal letter to the fire department, putting a stamp on it, and dropping it in the mail. By the time they receive it, route it to the right person, open it, and read it, your house is a pile of ash.
And the timeline of modern cyber warfare does not respect business hours. I mean, the data proves the failure of this approach. 60% of organizations take 8 to 60 days to remediate a high-severity issue in their supply chain.
An 8 to 60-day window.
That is an absolute eternity.
I can't even imagine.
Within hours of a vulnerability being weaponized, threat actors have already breached the perimeter, moved laterally across the network, exfiltrated terabytes of sensitive data, and deployed ransomware to encrypt the backups.
It's game over.
If it takes your organization a week just to figure out who internally owns the relationship with the compromised vendor, and then another week to get the vendor on the phone, you have already lost. The damage is done.
The diagnosis is in, and it's terminal for the old way of doing things. The walls of your enterprise are thick, but the plumbing is poisoned, the foundation is crumbling, and we're writing letters to the plumber while the building floods.
We cannot rely on emails, static spreadsheets, and false confidence anymore. It is time to actually assert control over the ecosystem.
Which is why we need to move from theory to execution.
Exactly.
If you are listening to this, and you're feeling that uncomfortable knot in your stomach, realizing your company is part of that 78% flying blind, this next segment is for you. Here begins your 90-day action plan.
Time to get to work.
The sources we've analyzed outline a very specific tactical blueprint for CIOs and security leaders to radically transform their vendor risk posture in a single quarter. We are breaking this down into 3 concrete phases.
Phase 1, dependency mapping and tiering. Because the absolute most common mistake leaders make when they try to tackle supply chain risk is trying to boil the ocean.
Trying to fix everything at once.
They look at their procurement list, see 4,000 vendors, and try to send an automated security assessment to every single one of them. It results in metric tons of useless data and 0 operational resilience.
So over the next 90 days, you must ruthlessly prioritize.
Ruthlessly.
Step 1 of this phase. Identify your top 10 to 20 mission-critical vendors. But the methodology here is vital. You do not rank them by how much money you spend with them, and you do not rank them by brand prestige.
No, you rank them strictly by business criticality.
Easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
If I'm a CIO with 4,000 vendors, how do I practically filter that down without my department heads screaming that their specific software tool is mission critical and needs to be in the top 20?
You force them to define the blast radius. You ask a very simple, very pointed question. If this vendor unplugs their servers right now, does our primary revenue stream stop? Or do our core operations halt?
Cut through the noise.
Exactly. I mean, you might spend $5 million a year on a massive enterprise software license that the marketing and HR teams use for long-term analytics and talent tracking.
Sure, a massive contract.
If that system goes down for 3 days, it is incredibly annoying. People will complain.
Yeah.
But the business survives. Trucks still roll, payments still process.
Conversely, you might spend $50,000 a year on a tiny API service that handles your multi-factor authentication routing, or maybe a niche logistics broker that prints the shipping labels in your warehouse.
Exactly. If that $50,000 API goes down, your revenue stops instantly. Customers cannot log in. Boxes cannot leave the warehouse. That vendor is tier 1. Business criticality overrides spend.
So you're locking your top 10 to 20. Step 2 is where it gets highly analytical, tracing the concentration risk and mapping the sub-vendors, your 4th and 5th parties.
The hidden dependencies.
Right. The Sure Cloud framework from the sources introduces a fantastic operational lens for this called the tiering matrix. It evaluates these vendors based on a formula: impact multiplied by recoverability.
Let's break down the variables in that matrix. Impact requires you to move past vague descriptions. You must literally map the data flows and write down exactly which specific business processes halt if this vendor is unavailable.
Get specific.
Very. Does claims handling stop? Does automated payroll processing bounce? Do IoT sensors on your manufacturing floor lose connectivity? You need uncomfortable, highly documented specificity here.
Because a spreadsheet that just says vendor X, high risk, tells an incident responder absolutely nothing during a crisis.
Right. It's useless in the moment.
Yeah.
And the second variable is recoverability. This is where most organizations completely fail.
Oh, so?
Recoverability asks, can you switch to an alternative or restore the service within your acceptable recovery time objective? Do you have an actual playbook? Have you tested exporting your data out of their proprietary format and standing it up somewhere else?
Which naturally leads us to the deeply nested 4th and 5th parties. If I map my critical vendors and I find out my core payroll system relies on a third-party authentication broker.
Which relies on a small API startup.
Right, which is hosted on an obscure regional cloud provider.
Mm-hmm.
How do I even map that depth without spending a year and $1 million in consulting fees?
You don't map the entire internet. You focus strictly on the data flows of those 10 to 20 critical vendors. You require those tier 1 vendors to provide their own SBOMs and sub-processor lists.
Force them to do the homework.
Exactly. Once you identify those critical few paths, you build fallbacks specifically for them.
What does an engineered fallback actually look like in a modern SaaS environment?
It could be a secondary backup provider on a retainer contract just ready to spin up. It could be a predefined, heavily tested, degraded mode of operation where the application still functions, but with limited features.
Better than nothing.
Or, in some cases, it could be a completely manual, paper-based workaround for 48 hours.
Back to the Stone Age, but the business runs.
The goal is that when the 72-hour test comes, when that vendor vanishes on a Tuesday, you aren't running around the office trying to figure out what to do. You are calmly executing a pre-planned, pre-tested pivot.
Don't boil the ocean. Define the blast radius. Okay, so you spend the first 30 days of this 90-day plan identifying exactly who holds the keys to your operational survival and mapping their impact. Now we transition to phase 2 of the action plan. Contract security clauses as controls.
This is huge.
Because identifying the risk doesn't mitigate it. If a vendor decides to move their servers to an unsecured region tomorrow, knowing about it doesn't actually stop them. How do we actually put a leash on these external entities? That brings us to the legal side.
And this requires a massive cultural shift in how IT and legal collaborate. Historically, vendor contracts were viewed as purely legal paperwork, a hurdle to argue about during the procurement phase, sign, and then just file away in a drawer until renewal time 3 years later.
Forgotten about.
In 2026, you must treat your contracts as active frontline security controls.
The sources outline very specific mechanisms that need to be injected into every Tier 1 contract moving forward.
Yeah.
We are talking about clear, actionable security obligations. SLA service level agreements that aren't just about uptime percentages.
Right, 99.9% uptime isn't enough.
They need to be directly tied to operational continuity and failover testing.
And incredibly strict breach notification timeframes. None of this vague, we will notify you without undue delay or within 30 days language.
Lawyers love that vague language.
They do, but it kills your security response. A Tier 1 vendor must be contractually obligated to notify your security operations center within hours of discovering a potential compromise that affects your data or their core service delivery.
The contracts must also include painful financial penalties for non-compliance, obligations to provide updated software bills and materials with every major release, and ironclad unannounced audit rights.
Yes.
But the most aggressive and frankly the most fascinating concept the sources introduce here is the implementation of human-in-the-loop approval gates, or HITL.
HITL is an absolute game changer for supply chain control. Think about how dynamic cloud environments are today. An infrastructure vendor might decide to migrate their hosting region to a different country just to save on compute costs.
Happens all the time.
Or a SaaS provider might alter their oath scopes to request deeper, more pervasive access to your internal systems. Or they might add a new sub-processor based in a jurisdiction with entirely different hostile data privacy laws.
In the old model, they would just push that change. They might bury a notification in a product update newsletter, and you might find out by accident 6 months later.
If you're lucky. With HITL approval gates codified into the contract and enforced technically, that dynamic changes entirely.
So how do you enforce a HITL gate technically? Are we talking about a literal API block where their system cannot push an update to our tenant without a cryptographic sign-off from our security team? Or is this just like a legal threat?
It is a combination of both, but heavily leaning on technical enforcement via identity and access management IAM roles and infrastructure as code policies.
Okay, walk me through that.
You configure your environment so that the vendor's service account has strictly limited permissions. If the vendor attempts to make a material change like requesting new API scopes, attempting to exfiltrate data to an unknown IP range, or pushing an update that alters core system configurations, your automated policies block the action.
It just stops them cold.
It triggers an automatic pause. The change cannot proceed until a designated human on your end, a security engineer, reviews the requested change, assesses the risk against your corporate appetite, and explicitly approves it via a cryptographic key or internal approval workflow.
It's like renting out an office building. You wouldn't let the property management company bring in some unknown subcontractor to change the physical locks on your server room without your explicit permission and without your security guards being present.
No, you would never allow that.
Why on earth do we let software vendors do the digital equivalent with our most critical customer data?
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mindset shift. You are asserting sovereignty over your operational environment, and let's be clear, if a prospective vendor balks at these clauses during negotiations,
Walk away.
that is a massive flashing red flag. It indicates one of two things. Either their internal engineering is too immature to track and segment their own changes, or they view your security as a secondary concern to their developmental convenience. Either way, you reconsider the relationship.
So you've mapped your critical dependencies, you know the blast radius, and you've rewritten the contract so you actually have technical enforcement and legal teeth. You are in the final 30 days of the 90-day sprint.
The home stretch.
Now comes the phase that often makes or breaks a CIO's career. Phase 3. Boon reporting and metrics. You've done all this work. How do you prove to your CEO and the board of directors that you actually made the company safer and more resilient?
And this requires a fundamental translation of language. The National CIO Review Source emphasizes a critical truth. Boards of directors do not want more dashboards filled with heat maps, threat feeds, and dense technical jargon.
They're not engineers.
Right. They do not care about the specifics of an open source library vulnerability. They want answers they can trust regarding the health of the business.
Which means we have to stop spoon-feeding them vanity metrics. Telling the board we sent out 500 security questionnaires this quarter and 400 were completed is absolutely useless.
Completely useless.
It sounds like you're doing a lot of work,
Yeah.
but it tells them nothing about whether the company can actually survive a targeted attack.
Exactly. You are reporting on activity, not outcomes. You need to transition entirely to GRC governance, risk, and compliance resilience metrics. You need to measure the operational friction between a threat and your recovery.
Let's get specific. What are the metrics a modern CIO should be putting on that board slide?
First, instead of questionnaire volume, report on MTTDV, mean time to detect a vendor issue. Yes. How fast does your organization actually know if a vendor has gone down or been breached?
Why does MTTDV matter more than, say, a questionnaire completion rate?
Because it measures reality. If your vendor gets hit with ransomware and your MTTDV is 14 days because you rely on them putting out a press release.
Then you're already 14 days behind the hackers.
Exactly. The board needs to know that unacceptable lag time exists. It highlights a massive blind spot. The goal is to drive that metric down to hours using automated threat intelligence and live monitoring.
Another critical metric from the sources is time to decision. When a vendor fails or is compromised, how quickly can your organization authorize and execute that fallback plan we talked about earlier?
That's a huge one.
Is it a pre-approved playbook, or does it require convening an emergency committee of 6 executives who argue for 3 days while the system burns?
The board wants to know the speed of execution. You should also report on the percentage of your Tier 1 and Tier 2 vendors that have live signal monitoring.
So, meaning you aren't just looking at them annually.
Right. You are actively tracking their operational status, identity alerts, and sub-processor changes in real time.
And my absolute favorite metric from the SureCloud piece, the one that proves you aren't just theorizing, the date of your last successful export or restore test.
Ah, yes. Proving portability.
Proving that a vendor X holds your data hostage tomorrow or gets acquired by a competitor and shuts down, you actually know how to get your data back. You know how to stand it up somewhere else, and you know exactly what day you last physically tested that capability.
That is the ultimate, undeniable proof of resilience. And if we connect this to the broader theme of the deep dive, it's about the security leader thinking like a business operator.
Wearing a different hat.
Yes. You have to frame vendor risk not in terms of vulnerabilities and patches, but in terms of revenue, cash flow, and operational continuity.
You have to translate cyberspeak into board speak.
Exactly. If a vendor failure impacts online transaction processing or, delays the onboarding of new patients in a hospital, that is a top-line business metric.
It's not an IT problem anymore.
No, it is a financial exposure and reputational damage problem. When a CIO stands in front of the board and says, vendor A processes 40% of our daily revenue, we have mapped their nested sub-processors, instituted a contractually enforced 4-hour breach notification SLA, and successfully tested a full data restore playbook as of last Tuesday.
That CIO just won the room.
That CIO gains immense influence, budget authorization, and trust.
You are no longer the IT person complaining about compliance.
Yeah.
You are the executive reporting on financial protection and reputational resilience. That is how you get and keep a seat at the big table.
It represents a total maturation of the security function. It moves an organization from a state of passive compliance, just filing away surveys and hoping for the best to active, continuous engineered readiness.
So we've covered massive ground today. We've traced the evolution of the threat from internal networks to the sprawling, invisible attack surface of the global supply chain.
It's a daunting landscape.
It really is. We've broken down the anatomy of open-source poisoning and CI/CD pipeline attacks, and most importantly, we've laid out a relentless 90-day action plan.
Identify the blast radius of your critical dependencies. Enforce your security posture through aggressive contract clauses and human-in-the-loop gates.
And translate your progress into hard operational resilience metrics for the board.
That's the playbook.
To everyone listening, whether you run a massive enterprise team or you're just trying to secure a growing startup, I want to leave you with a direct challenge. This is drawn straight from the thought leaders in our sources today, and it is something you need to mull over as you head into the office tomorrow morning.
It's a tough question.
It is. Look at your sprawling list of partners, suppliers, and cloud platforms. If you had to pressure test just one vendor this quarter, if you had to physically pull the plug on one critical supplier tomorrow morning just to see if your 72-hour survival plan actually works, which one would it be and why?
That single question forces you to confront the reality of your architecture. It separates the falsely confident from the truly resilient.
Take this 90-day plan to your team tomorrow. Start defining your blast radius. Start rewriting those contracts. Because as we've learned today, it doesn't matter how impenetrable the walls of your castle are if you don't know who controls the plumbing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.